Local stories, local people. We're taking you inside Western Mass news. It's the Even Better Western Mass podcast with Dave Madsen.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Wherever you are as we begin the month of April, I do hope you're doing well. Recently, we know the passing of actor George Segal, and it brought to mind a story from many, many years ago, a story of my dad and myself on a Friday night in the summertime around 1965 or 1966, hiding in the Southampton Cemetery to watch the filming of a scene from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf with Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, Sandy Dennis, and George Segal. This particular evening, Mike Nichols directing. I think it was one of the first movies that he ever directed, too. But there was a scene outside, and if you've seen the movie, and if you haven't, I really think you should. It's just a great timepiece about Western Mass, and not only that, but just a great movie. But there's a scene where they all leave the bar, and there's a fight, and Elizabeth Taylor gets angry. She gets in the car, and she drives away. But in the meantime, Sandy Dennis and George Segal were walking down Route 10 in Southampton, past the Southampton Cemetery, where my dad and I were hiding to watch all the goings-on. It was quite the time in town here, really. I mean, there were a couple of houses on Palmyra Meadow Road that they used as dressing rooms. They filmed here for quite a while, not only here, but at Smith College. But I thought I'd share that story, my George Segal story. A good actor and just seemed like a very fun guy. But anyhow, I'm very sorry to hear of his passing. Well, speaking of good guys, my guest on this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast is a longtime friend, Gary Brodeur. Gary is an accomplished ventriloquist, comedian, actor, master of ceremonies, and radio personality. I'm sure you've seen Gary on stage with his cast of characters, or maybe even heard him on the radio. Gary has had a fascinating career with some great stories about the very famous people he's met along the way. He recently retired as an account executive for Western Mass News. In this week's podcast, Gary and I talk about his retirement, his long career, and what he's doing now. Here's my conversation with Gary Brodeur. Gary Brodeur, welcome back.
Hi, Dave.
Full disclosure here, Gary and I did this about a week ago.
We did.
But for some particular reason, it didn't record. So here we are again, because we're both retired and have nothing else to do.
Now, what do you mean? For some reason, it didn't record. Like I'm not at fault here, Dave.
No, it has nothing to do with you. It's totally to do with me. We got done, and I went to play it back, and there was like a second. I thought, oh, geez, this is not good.
Yeah. Well, and then afterwards, I thought, well, I guess that didn't go that well.
It went very well. And we're going to try to recreate it again this week.
Okay.
And being the old radio and TV pros we are, we should be able to fake it for an hour. No.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
Anyway, how's retirement?
Hey, retirement is fantastic. I was thinking just this afternoon when I was driving back to do this, and I was thinking to myself, this retirement thing, I'm way too busy. Way too busy to be retired. So it's going well. There's a lot of stuff I'm doing. So
isn't it true though? I mean, my biggest fear when I got through, well, almost 2 years ago now, was that I wouldn't have enough to do. And
right. Yeah, absolutely.
Between stuff around the house and grandkids,
Yep.
there's more than enough to do.
There sure is. There sure is. Naps, podcasts, a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. Gary and I worked together for a number of years at Western Mass News. But for years before that, Gary was a sales rep at WSHM Channel 3, and then we all moved. But you may know him from his radio years, WPVQ, and you may have also seen him out on the circuit. With his good friend Rusty and his cast of characters. So, you got more than enough going on.
Yeah. There's certainly enough going on. I couldn't remember when I started at WPVQ. I was the first voice on the air. So it was a brand new station and it just signed on. I couldn't remember when it was. I couldn't even remember the year. And then I finally found out it was July of 1994.
94. Now, you and
Yeah.
I share something in common, a number of things in common, but also our first radio jobs.
And being handsome, of course. We share that as well.
You're right on your half, but maybe not on mine.
I'm sorry, I lost track of where you were.
First radio jobs. And or
First
also
radio
short-term
jobs.
Well,
Oh,
we're going to talk about
yes.
short-term memory loss.
Yeah. Oh, man. My wife's got essential oils for that now. So
Oh, all right.
the short-term memory loss and all that kind of stuff.
That's something for a whole nother day.
Yeah, we both started WMAS, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think
Way back when.
we concluded that maybe we were about a year apart.
Yep. Yeah, you were there about a year before me.
Yeah, I
I'd
was
already
there.
left.
I started in August of 1970, and we figured you were about a year later, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that was quite the facility.
It was. It had a whole new meaning. I think I told you the story where one day that we're having transmitter problems and said, well, you have to go out to the transmitter shack, which was in the back. This is right off the North End Bridge in Springfield.
Yeah, we should clarify. It's not where it is now.
And when I got out there, I had the key to the padlock, but the padlock was rusted. And so I had to go get a hammer and break it off. And when the door opened, we've all heard of river rats. Well, they do exist. So
yeah, you found them all.
I found quite a few. And
yeah,
well, let's put it this way: I never edged my way into the transmitter shack. So
yeah. Well, that was right down there by the river. So
it was, because I think back on that. I mean, you think back at those days, how anxious we were to get that first job. And I think I was paid, it was like $1.25 an hour.
Yeah, it was a little crazy, wasn't it?
It was something. All I remember, I was working at data processing at UMass and got my first radio job. And I told my dad, and they were going to pay me $4 an hour. And I said, no, I
want the dollar an hour job.
Actually, I'm underplaying. It was $2 an hour. That's what it was. So, but
I don't remember what I was making.
I'm sure the same way with you. It's like, hey, I'm in radio.
Absolutely. You gotta be the radio star, and back in those days, you know what it was like. You had to, you were lucky to start in this market. So many of us started way, in the boondocks of New Hampshire and Vermont, and then you work your way this way,
Well, you remember back in those days, especially in radio, because most of radio was local. And a lot of people were coming out of the Dick Robinson's Connecticut School of Broadcasting. And I remember, because I worked with a bunch of guys who did that. The promise was, we will get you that first job. But never, ever did they say where that first job would be.
Yeah. It was good for that kind of stuff. But I don't know. You didn't go there, did you?
No. I worked. I was at UMass, and I worked at MUA and places like that. But you think back to those days, just one experience, because it was all live.
Absolutely. And while you were at MUA, I was at Styx radio station. Actually, me and a couple other guys that you probably know were the guys that put the FM station on the air over there.
Yeah.
So, and that was 1971, I think. 71, range, yeah. Somewhere right in there.
So after that, where did your career take you?
Oh, I don't remember that far back. Well, I think I ended up at, it's a funny thing, because I'll remember there was a station in Westfield that I ended up over there.
WDEW.
DEW, but it was LDM.
By then, okay.
By the time I got there, yeah. And so I worked there for a while too. And then up to, I think, HMP in Northampton. Eventually going around the horn and ended up at PVQ was my last radio thing.
But you were not only on the air, you were also in sales and programming and all that kind of stuff too, right?
Yeah. I did record company relations and also advertising sales as well. So, it was a long day. Plus, with the morning show that I was doing it as a ventriloquist, I ended up being the opening act for a lot of country acts, that type of thing, because it was a contemporary, well, it still is a contemporary country station. But this was in the heydays of Garth Brooks and Shania Twain and Faith Hill and Tim McGraw and the Chicks and all that kind of stuff. So I would end up, being an opening act for some people and get off the air at 9 o'clock in the morning and go into sales and record company relations and all that kind of stuff, and then work right through the day. And then go to be an opening act at night and not get out of that till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And it wasn't worth going to bed at that point. So just drive back to the radio station, lay down on the couch for half an hour and get up and do it all over again. So
That's why we did
it's
that
a long
stuff
day.
we did that when we were young. Now you, not to drop any names, but you've met quite a few famous people through the years. You were telling me a great story about Garth Brooks and your daughter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My daughter, who was 13, 14 at the time, was a huge Garth Brooks fan. So I had made arrangements to go to see him in concert, and she didn't know that I had already set up previously a meeting for her and all that kind of stuff. So we went out to the venue and rented a white limousine to take her and the family out there. And so we went out, and she bought all the stuff at the concession stand, T-shirts and programs and all that kind of stuff. And then said, "Hey, come on with me." And we went down by the side of the stage, went backstage, and went over to his dressing room. There was a big GB on the door, which of course meant Gary Brodeur. So we knocked on the door. He opens the door and he goes, "Hi, Ashley, how's it going?" Which is my daughter's name. And her jaw just hit the floor because she had no idea. So so we spent a great. It was actually the other funny part of it is we're spending a lot of time with him there, and I said, I don't want to tie you up because I can hear, your opening act is out there performing now, and he goes, don't sweat it. We're okay. They'll wait for me. So. So we had all the time in the world. And then a few years ago, I rented another white limousine and we went to see him when he came back out of retirement and met all over again. And of course, this time he was with Trisha Yearwood. So as I said to him, I said, first Trisha Yearwood walked into where we were, followed by Garth right after her. I looked over and I said to Garth, I said, "This is great. It's a twofer." So we got both Trisha Yearwood and Garth Brooks that time.
Now, yeah, you were mentioning you had Garth on the radio show, but
spectacular guy.
he had no idea that you did. You had a partner on the radio who happened to be you.
He had no idea that my partner was a dummy. So when we were sitting on the floor in front of a coffee table. For some reason, he likes to sit on the floor a lot. So he and I were sitting there, and he saw one of the photographs from the morning show, which was me and my partner, and put his head down on the coffee table and just started pounding it, laughing hysterically. And he said, "I have to do this show. I have to do this show." And one thing led to another, and eventually he did. But the station was also tied in with ABC Radio Networks out of Dallas. And the program director down there just could not understand how we got all these big country names on the station because he couldn't get it done for ABC. But it was all because of my partner. So
it was all Rusty.
It was all him. It was all him. If it was just me, they would just say, "Well."
No, well, I think that's the other part that for years, and God, going back to when you were a kid, you've been fascinated by ventriloquism.
Yeah. I mean, it started when I was, I started doing the puppet thing probably when I was about 7, 8 years old, and that quickly led to ventriloquism. But the thing is, I found out in school. I used to between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I used to go around in grade school and do shows at all the different classrooms. And I thought, this is pretty good. I don't have to go to class. I just go around and do shows for a month and a half. And so one thing led to another, and you get away with murder. So,
Did you just swap it out for a good grade?
yeah. I did my best.
But that developed into a career for you, in addition to what you were doing on radio.
Yeah, it did. We used to do a lot of performance stuff. A lot of company banquets. Let's see what else. Yeah, a lot of company banquets, holiday shows, that kind of stuff. And then that led into the comedy clubs. If you remember way back when, there was a comedy club on every street corner for a while, until Comedy Central started happening on cable, and then a lot of people didn't want to go out and see comedy anymore because they could get the best in the world right on their TV. So that started to dry up the comedy clubs. But that was an interesting thing on its own, because you meet a lot of interesting people.
Well, the big venue around here was what, the Hukilau?
The Comedy Connection at the Hukilau.
Yeah.
Yep. It was run by Bill Blumenthal, who's a big guy in Boston, and he owns a couple of comedy clubs. Now he owns the Wilbur Theater in Boston. He's gone big time. But he had a comedy club in Boston as well, Comedy Connection, I think it was called, in Boston too. And he also ran the Comedy Connection at the Hukilau. So he would hire all the entertainment. So I used to do a lot of work there for him, and that's where I first met Jeff Dunham. Actually, I was his opening act several times at the Comedy Connection at the Hukilau.
I mean, we talked about your influences, back in the 50s. I mean, really, ventriloquism, it was big back then.
It was big with between the three big ones were Edgar Bergen, Paul Winchell, and Jimmy Nelson were the three big ones. And I mean, Jimmy Nelson made his career out of doing Nestle's commercials for Nestle's chocolate and hot chocolate and all that kind of stuff. So
Nestles, Nestle's is the very best.
Yep.
Finish
chocolate. and it. Yeah. So, those were the days. Days.
We can't remember yesterday, but we can remember that stuff.
I know. You say, it used to be, they used to say that at one point, that older people remember stuff from 100 years ago, but they can't remember what they had for lunch. So it's true.
Sorry, what were we talking about?
There you go.
There you go. But the cool thing is you got a chance to meet some of these folks, through the course of the years. I mean, you're heroes.
I got to work with Jimmy Nelson a couple of times, which was quite interesting to actually, for those people that remember Jimmy Nelson, Danny O'Day, and Farfel doing the Nestle's commercials and stuff. A couple of times he said, "Hey, I need somebody's got to bring Farfel out when I need him on stage." So that was me. So I got to hang around with him for quite a bit, and he actually came out to the house one time and spent the evening out there. So that was, fascinating as well. And then Paul Winchell, I never got to meet him face to face before he passed away, but we used to correspond when people used to write letters. So we have a lot of letters that went back and forth, and a lot of phone calls, that kind of stuff. But we never actually got to meet face to face.
I remember in his later years too that I think he voiced Gargamel on the Smurfs.
He did
early on. Yeah, he did a lot of voiceover work, right?
He did a lot of voiceover work. Yeah, a lot for Disney too. He created the voice of Tigger in the Winnie the Pooh commercials, the Winnie the Pooh movie. That was Paul Winchell as well. So when you hear Tigger, not in the later stuff, but the original stuff, that was Paul Winchell.
That's all him.
That's all him. And he used to do a lot of other voices for Disney too, lesser known ones, but that's his most famous one that he did.
So what makes a good ventriloquist? We talked about one of the raps on Edgar Bergen was you could see his mouth move, but is that necessarily make for a bad one or a good one? Or
well, I thought that at one point, it's all about your lips don't move, and that's only part of it. Part of it is actually involves acting because you're trying to portray this character with you as being a living, breathing entity, person, dog, cat, whatever it happens to be. So you're trying to convince the audience that that character's real. So, there's a bit of acting there. You have to have the comedy chops to pull it off because you have to have the timing and all that type of thing as well. So it's more than just not moving your lips. And Edgar Bergen proved that because of his days in radio, his lips used to move. So when TV came around, it was a whole new ball game, and his lips were moving, but his character development was just incredible. Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd, great characters, just great characters, had their own personalities, all that type of thing.
I suppose the whole thing with that is the good ones is the focus is not on the ventriloquist himself, but on his characters.
Right. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I think 50% of it is what magicians call misdirection. So, while I'm doing this over here, I'm attracting your attention over here. So, yeah, half of it's just misdirection. So they're looking, and your brain is like that, in that if this character's mouth is moving, then that must be where the sound is coming from. And if this guy's mouth is not moving, then that's not where it's coming from. So your brain kind of falls into that automatically as well.
We talked too that when you were WSHM and Western Mass News, that for the last 3 years that I was on the air, that's what you did with me. that's how I made it those last 3 years.
Yeah. But you didn't see me because I was off to the side and down below. But I was there.
Well, you look, it's like with Paul Winchell and Jimmy Nelson and Edgar Bergen as he got older. But as you got into the 1970s, early 80s, that ventriloquism just kind of faded into the background, didn't it?
It does. It seems to go in cycles. We've been on quite a long run with it now. When I had Jeff Dunham's probably the famous one right now. Jeff Dunham and Terry Fader and the young lady Darcy Lynn, who's kind of an up and comer. But Terry Fader's out in Vegas making a fortune, and Jeff Dunham's making a fortune, of course. And when Jeff Dunham started to go big time into the arena shows, he had already been out working the comedy clubs for 22 years. Because I asked him when he first came to the Mass Mutual Center, and I said, Jeff, for crying out loud, I mean, how long were you going to the Hukilau in Chicopee and doing the comedy club thing? 20 years. So it was one of those overnight sensations that took 20 years to get there,
Yeah.
But, he's been on a long run. And ventriloquism, of course, gets to ride on his back, just like it did with Jimmy Nelson and Paul Winchell at one point, and Edgar Bergen. So who knows how long it's going to last this time before they find out that we're just a little whacked.
Well, there's the other part of that with Terry Fader and Jeff Dunham too. There's a little edge to what they do as opposed to what Paul Winchell and Jimmy Nelson were doing.
Yeah. You think?
Yeah. I mean, their shows were mostly for kids. These are not.
No. Well, Jeff Dunham, he rides the edge, and it's, as we were saying in our first podcast with a couple of comedians, is that you want, with your audience, you want to step up to the edge and then take one step over. And these days, you really can't do that anymore because of all the political correctness and all that type of stuff. So you really you have to be really careful what you're doing and what you're saying these days. So.
Well, these guys too, it's, again, the development of their characters, and, same thing with you. I mean, you've had a couple of acts. You've had an act for kids and you've had an act for adults, right? It's a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, I started doing the whole family thing originally when I started performing on stage, that type of thing. So it was families, the parents with the kids, that kind of stuff. And I used to do kid shows a little bit here and there. And then at one point I just said, I don't want to do that anymore. So I just started working, the comedy clubs and company banquets where it was all adults and that type of thing. And not that the material is X-rated, by any means, but I could go to being around R-rated. And I just found that more satisfying, I guess, for me.
Now, what did Ashley think of all the other members of the family?
Ashley and the boys could have cared less because they were just so used to seeing him sitting around the house or, in my office or whatever. They were just like, it's not a big deal.
But now there's a grandson, and what are his thoughts?
He does not like puppets at all. He wants absolutely nothing to do with it.
So there's no way the business is going to carry on in the Brodeur family.
No. Everybody says, just let us know what you want to do with them once you're gone. What are your wishes? Because I don't think anybody in the family is going to take it up or be interested in it whatsoever. So
I mean, the other part of this too is with COVID-19 and the way we've shut down for the last year. There hasn't been much road work, has there?
Not at all. Actually, Terry Fader just opened his show again in Las Vegas just this past Thursday. So he's been down for the count for a year now himself. Of course, he wasn't starving this past year. Let's put it that way.
Now, do you practice? Do you practice at home?
I used to a lot, but I'm just not performing that much anymore. So
you're sitting there watching TV, and all of a sudden you decide that the pillow is going to talk.
No.
Okay,
I haven't gotten to that point yet, Dave.
Okay.
Give it another couple of years.
In the home.
Yeah, when I'm in the home, Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that?
No. Well, it would be good way to amuse yourself, but or
Yeah.
everyone else.
I'll be in the home talking to my hand or something, and people go, "Yeah, he's out there."
Well, then with you, it's like, well, he talks to himself. No, he always did.
Well, somebody said, who was it? I think another ventriloquist friend, Ron Lucas. He said at one point, he said, ventriloquism is controlled schizophrenia.
Yeah. There are times where I wish I had that outlet,
Yeah. Well, you can always take it up, Dave.
Well, it's one of those things where I always said in television or radio, especially when you're going live, you can always say anything once.
Yeah.
But I think as a ventriloquist that said, "Hey, listen, I didn't say it; he did."
Yes, and I think I mentioned this to you at one time. Paul Winchell was on stage years ago, and I think it was the Copacabana actually, when he was performing on stage in clubs and stuff, and he had a heckler, and the heckler was driving him crazy. And he had his dummy, his puppet, Jerry Mahoney, threw out a very sharp barb to this guy to shut him up. And the guy got up out of his chair and headed right up to the stage and just punched Jerry Mahoney right in the face, knocked him right out of his hands.
Knock on wood.
So he believed it was real. So there you go. I guess Paul Winchell was doing his job. And he didn't get punched in the face.
No.
But Jerry did.
Yeah, he did. I look back. Well, a little paint will, touch-up paint will fix that. But I look back on my radio career, and nothing really stands out. But you were telling me about one particular birthday party that you attended.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that.
Well, and still am a huge Beatles fan, but I was a fan from day one. I was sold on these guys. And so I went to Apple Records in New York City. Of course, they're in London as well, but they also had an office in New York City. So I went there one day to visit a friend there, and it was quite interesting because this was during the breakup of the Beatles. So everybody there was a little tense because they didn't know if they were going to have a job tomorrow or not, or who was going to show up, and that type of thing. And so he invited me to go to John Lennon's 31st birthday party, and I said yes, I would go.
There was no hesitation there, was there, Gary?
No. So I went to his 31st birthday party for 3 days. So it was quite interesting.
Well, you were young.
I was young. That was October 1971. So he was turning 31, and I was like 18, I think, something like that. 18. Yeah, I think I was 18 years old, and went there. And I remember walking into a room, and there's my hero sitting down, and he stands up to shake my hand. And the only thing I remember about that was I thought, he's kind of short, because I figured he had to be like 10 feet tall, and we were the same height. And so he stood up, shook my hand, and Yoko was there right next to him. So I turned around to sit down next to him. So now I'm facing the wall of where I came through the door, and there's a couch and a love seat. As I'm sitting down, sitting on the furniture is Ringo and his wife, Klaus Vormann, who's a bass player that they knew back in the German days. And he also did the artwork for the album Revolver, the front cover. He was there. Jim Keltner, drummer, he was there. Phil Spector was there. Allen Ginsberg, the poet, was there. Eric Clapton. So as I'm sitting down, I'm looking back at all these faces that are right across from me in the same room, sitting on the couch in the love seat. It was just, it was unbelievable.
That's when you pinch yourself and say, so how did I get here?
Yeah. How the heck did I get here? So
you must.
So I got to spend some time. I got to spend some time with him, and we actually did some interviews too. So that was good. And also, this is interesting. If you remember back in 1969, there was the whole thing about Paul McCartney being dead.
Yeah.
Remember that whole thing?
Yep.
At one point while we were taping, John Lennon said to me, he goes, LSD does not, or Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds does not mean LSD, and I didn't kill Paul. And that's the first and only time I've ever heard him refer to that whole thing that they thought was just stupid anyway. But
oh my God, what a memory! And I bet you must be looking forward to the Get Back, that coming out this summer.
Yep, it's coming out in August.
That last concert.
Yep, it was delayed for a year because it was supposed to be out September 4th of 2020. And they delayed it a whole year until we got through this whole COVID thing. So it's, and Peter Jackson, who's the director and the brainstorm guy behind the Lord of the Rings series, is probably what he's best known for. They gave him all the footage and all the audio. And it's, I've seen some of it, and it's miraculous what they've been able to do to restore that footage. It's just, it looks pristine. It's incredible.
I remember the first version of Get Back. It was like that this whole thing was bitter. And from what I understand about this movie is that this will prove that, no, it wasn't.
Right. Yep, exactly. It's, as somebody said recently, I think it was Stephen Colbert had Ringo on a couple of weeks ago. And he said, brothers fight. But in this new film, you can see that they actually were brothers. They got along, they loved each other, all that type of thing. And there was some, some skirmishes here and there, but that's what brothers do.
Always makes you wonder too that if John Lennon had lived, if they would have ever gotten back together. Given what you hear now, you think that that may have happened.
It might have. I mean, the big one was Paul, between Paul and John,
Yeah.
and he had basically, they had restored their relationship, so they were actually talking and seeing each other here and there. So it was coming back together again. And then, of course, they did the anthology after John Lennon had passed away, and the three of them did get back together, the three remaining Beatles. So would John have been there? I suppose it's a possibility,
Yeah. What if?
We'll never know.
You also had another encounter. The nice thing about doing this, that you and I remember all of these things from way back when, but I've told the story, and I loved, because there's been a lot of movies that have been made around here, but to this day, I think one of the best, if you want a real timepiece about Western Mass, especially Springfield, was the reincarnation of Peter Proud.
Yeah.
Which to me is just, it's still one of my favorite movies. And given the fact that it was shot around here, makes it even more so. But
Yeah.
You had an encounter with that. Sort of, right?
Yeah. Well, I was in the Screen Actors Guild at the time, so I was called into the sets around here, and I think basically in case somebody died, and they needed somebody to step in, that I was there, or I could get coffee or something. I don't know. Anyway, they were shooting at Yankee Peddler in Holyoke this day, and they were doing a dining room scene, and so I was there on set, and Jennifer O'Neill, who is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, model, actress.
Yeah, she's just fantastic. Always liked her a lot. And
what's the other one? Was it Summer of '42?
Summer of '42 was her big one.
In that?
Yeah, that was the big one. Yeah. And so they were shooting the dinner scene in the back dining room at the Yankee Peddler. For those of people who remember the Yankee Peddler, there was a dining room in front and a dining room in back. And the dining room in front, there was like a hallway that kind of went around the dining room, leading to the back dining room. And on this hallway, there was light sconces coming off the wall that hung down. And the pathway was kind of narrow. And then I heard the bells go off, which meant that they were done shooting the scene. And here comes Jennifer O'Neill I'm heading toward the dining room that they were shooting in. She's heading out of the dining room. She's headed right toward me, and I'm the only one there.
You're young and single.
And she's wearing this beautiful white dress, and she's coming along, and I'm walking toward her thinking, oh my God, what do I say? Hello? What do I do? And then bang, my head hit one of the sconces, and I went down on my knees.
Did she help you?
Oh yeah, she ran over. Oh, you okay? Are you okay? And yeah, I'm fine. I have no ego left whatsoever, but I'm fine.
You have an interesting way of meeting new women.
That's how my life is gone. Yeah.
I recommend that movie, though. It is a great timepiece, because you look at the Springfield scenes. The whole premise is this guy was having these dreams that they had another life, that he was murdered.
Right.
But the flashback on that thing is the Memorial Bridge. That's what it starts at. But then he comes up here, and but I think it was before they built the courthouse, and I think the Civic Center had just been built. So I mean, it's a whole different look to downtown.
Absolutely, and
Great
a
movie.
lot. Yeah, and a lot of other places that were, like the Yankee Peddler and things like that. Although I don't think you would know it was the Yankee Peddler.
No,
that's just happened to be where they shot it.
So beyond that, she came to your rescue, and that was it.
And that was it. Then everybody moved on. My ego is completely damaged, and that was the end of my run-in with Jennifer O'Neill.
So we fast
Talk about
forward.
embarrassing.
Hey, but that's a good way to meet somebody.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's like the pity sort of thing.
Yeah, I suppose. Got her attention for a second anyway.
Well, the good thing is I look at you, it didn't leave a scar, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, that's because this thing's hard as a rock. So.
So let's fast forward to 2021. You retire from advertising and from Western Mass News, and you've jumped into the podcast world.
And now, a man who feels you shouldn't have to be a superhero to wear tight pants and a cape, Gary Brodeur.
Okay. So I was just saying that this is either the dumbest thing I've ever attempted to do or the stupidest thing I've ever attempted to do. You could pick whichever one you want. I like all the technical aspects of everything. So I still like learning about all that kind of stuff. So that's what got me going on it. And then, of course, we did the first podcast, and just as kind of a test and to work out some of the technical issues and all that type of thing. And, I called in a couple of friends of mine that are comedians as well, a lot younger than I am. So they bring that insight into it. And my daughter's a part of it as well. Ashley, who's, the 13-year-old at Garth Brooks. Is in the podcast as well.
Now, if you can see Ashley, because she's a personal trainer, she makes appearances on Western Mass News.
That's right.
Better Western Mass. This is even better Western Mass, but that's just better.
Yeah. Well, that's true. You just stole it from them. Even better. Even better. Western Mass.
I don't know if I've lived up to that quite yet, but I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, like all podcasts are.
Well, I guess, I expected it to be perfection coming out of the gate, and it was far from that. But it was fun to do.
But you're like me. You also like the technical aspect of it. It's a great excuse to buy all this stuff.
Oh, don't say that. My wife has already figured that out.
Or borrow it on spec.
She said, so you're going to do another podcast? I'm like, I don't know. She goes, you just like buying the equipment. So she's figured it out.
It is funny because, you think back as far as editing these and put these, it's all done digitally, because you and I grew up on reel-to-reel tapes where we edited it with razor blades and tape.
Yep. Razor blades and tape.
In the early days of radio for us, a razor blade was a dangerous thing to have in our hands.
Yeah. Yeah, for many reasons. But can you imagine that?
Well, I always tell the story.
Physically cutting tape.
That the first thing that I ever did was I volunteered at WFCR. They didn't have internships. And Art Cohen was the news director there at the time. He's the one who told me that I should try to find another career. But
that's nice. That's encouraging.
It was encouraging, but I stuck it out. And he had me. This is 1970, which was the student strike year. But Jerry Rubin was speaking at Holyoke Community College. Okay. And he sent me there with the portable tape recorder, and I recorded the whole thing. And this guy spoke for about 2 hours, and every other word out of his mouth was the F-bomb. So I get it back, and he said, here's what I want you to do. Every time he says that, he said, I want you to make an edit and reverse it. Well, I probably made 2,000 edits. And I learned, but what a great way to learn how to edit on reel to reel. And that's what I did. And so that if I was ever going to fall back on a job as an editor, at least in the early years, that would have worked. But now it's all done digitally. I mean, it's easy.
It's all cut and but back in those days, and if you were lucky, you had a editing block where you put the tape in across the whole thing. and then you could cut down the middle and splice it. And oh, yeah, that was to think how you do it now compared to then. It's night and day.
Now these kids will never figure it out.
Yeah. Well, radio is so much of radio is all. I'm sure this isn't the proper word, automated, but they voice track it, and so there's probably not a lot of editing anyway. So, which is too bad.
Really is.
It's
You don't
gone
have
that route.
the spontaneity of live anymore. And that's what I always enjoyed about the news, that, I think the moments that people remember the most were the stuff that happened in between news stories and things like that. But it was live TV, and it still is.
Yeah.
Still is.
So, it's radio's tough. It's tough.
But in retirement for guys like us, podcasts are good things.
Yeah. It's what's the thing that something killed the radio star?
Yeah,
What video podcast killed the radio star? Yeah. So,
well,
I
listen,
don't know.
I have kept you way too long. I mean, we've done this twice now, and I think actually, I think actually the second one is the better of the two. The first one was good.
Oh man, Dave, I don't know.
That's only the one that went out in the air. If someone was watching it and recording it, they have it. But we have this. So if folks want your podcast, where do they go?
GaryBrodeur.com is the easiest place to go to. It's there's also links on that page to Facebook and YouTube and Twitter as well. So you can find it all there. But the videos, the podcasts themselves are housed on the video tab of GaryBrodeur.com, of which there's one right now.
And there's fascinating conversation, and all of your characters are there too.
The characters come in at the end of the podcast, yes, as I ask them to help out with the podcast. And you'll see what happens with those guys.
All right, my friend. Always good to see you.
Good to see you too, Dave.
We'll have to keep meeting like this. If I don't record, we'll do this again next week. My thanks to Gary Brodeur for being my guest on this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Now, to learn more about Gary, what he's doing, his podcast too, you can go to his website, GaryBrodeur.com. Thanks for watching or listening to this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Wherever you are, stay well, stay safe, and if you can, join me next week.